In this video, I'm going to show you how to incorporate images and 3D models with Google Earth Studio imagery in After Effects without rotoscoping. This example uses Cinema 4D Lite, which is incorporated in After Effects. So let's get started. In Chrome, we're going to go to Google Earth Studio and create a new project. Once we've set up our parameters, we'll click on Start. And we're going to start off at the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, France. So many of you are obviously familiar with constructing a project using the timelines. So I will fast forward through this. Just want to keep in mind though that when you are compositing various elements together, you want to have a bit of a plan on how you want the images to present themselves. So in this particular composition, I wanted to fly in and then focus on the arches so that we can show the objects moving behind the actual Arc de Triomphe. And then pull back a bit to reveal the Eiffel Tower and the landscape of Paris. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, what we're going to be doing is creating a regular composition or render. Then we'll be creating a composition or render with a green screen layer. This will allow us to sandwich in between the two layers any 3D objects or models and simulate a 3D environment. So to create the green screen, we're going to use a KML file, which we're going to create in Google Earth Pro. So this is the desktop application of Google Earth and is available for download from Google's website. Once Google Earth Pro has opened up, we're going to go to the same location, so the Arc de Triomphe, and then we will create our KML layer using Google Earth Pro. So we're just zooming in there. And so you can see it's pretty much what we saw in Google Earth Studio. So we're going to use the polygon tool. There are a number of different techniques that we can use. For this particular one, we're going to use the polygon. And we're going to place points around the circle. As you can see, it's filling in here now as we move around. And when you've put your last point in, we'll go over to the dialog box here. We're going to change our colors. Now for this particular one, we're just going to keep our border and we'll make it green in color. And then we will select the color of our fill. And we're going to select filled from the drop down, which will actually disregard the line. Go back to altitude. We're going to select relative to ground. And then we're going to put in a value of 1 meter. You will find that you have to jump from tab to tab or box to box to refresh the screen. But once you've got the settings done, you'll select OK, and then we're going to right mouse click on the item and select Save As. And we're going to save this as a KML file as opposed to a KMZ file. We're going to jump back over now to Google Earth Studio and import that KML file. And as you can see now, it's being applied to the image. And I'm just going to apply a time of day setting here. The renders always look a little bit nicer with the sun coming in at a different angle. Adds a little bit of color to the buildings themselves. So I'll just find a good time of day. So I'll just speed up here a bit while I tweak. So just checking the color on the light and making any final adjustments. And so once things look good, we're going to click on Render. So this is the new beta version of Earth Studio where it allows you to save locally into a drive. So I just selected a folder and I am clicking Render. So this one particular render will be the green screen version of the rendering, and we'll go back and do it again without the overlay of the KML as our base layer render. And so we're just going to have another quick look at it here, and we do need to actually add a track point. So we're going to add one right here in front of the arc, or the arch, and that will be used later for being able to align up our 3D models. And so just the one track point, and that's at a ground level. You can see its altitude right there. Just want to make sure that I don't put it on top of the actual building or structure, because you do get the altitudes from there. So we're going to, again, save this. We're going to save it with the JSX file, and we will send that one away as well. Okay, so now that we have our two renders done, we're going to switch over now into After Effects. I'm going to select File and Script and Run Script File. So this will be the base layer, so the non-green screen version, and we'll import the JSX there. And so that will give us our track point and obviously our footage. So we're going to delete that text layer. And then I'm going to go into the project area and right mouse click, select Import and File. And now we're going to import, as opposed to running a script file, but import the footage for our green screen. So we'll go into the footage folder, select the first item, make sure that we're doing the image sequence, and OK. And so now it puts it into a new composition if you have that selected. So we will just close that out. And we're going to drag the green screen footage now down to our composition. So you can see that now is over top. So as we're going to be using Cinema 4D Lite to generate some 3D models, it will need a background for us to use to look at, or a representation of the actual After Effects file. So in here, before we get anything started, we're just going to render out a version in an AVI format that we can then use in Cinema 4D. So now we save our file. So we've got our background AVI and we've saved the file. And now we're ready to incorporate Cinema 4D. So we're going to go to File, Export, and then Maxon Cinema 4D. Just gives us a warning that 2D layers will not be transferred. We'll click OK, and we'll save that to the same folder. So this is our Cinema 4D file. Once that has saved, and sometimes it takes a few seconds, we'll jump over to the folder, and you can see it there. It's our Cinema 4D file. We'll just drag that into our After Effects project. This usually takes a few seconds, and there it appears. Now we'll drag it actually down to our composition underneath the green screen layer. Or right mouse click on it, open, and open or load original. So now it's going to launch Cinema 4D. If you don't have a registered version of the Cinema 4D Lite, it may prompt you for registration. You can do that and then come back to this point in the video. So you can see here it's got our project with our track point and our camera information. This can be fairly confusing, so let's bring it into the visual world. We're going to double click in the space in the bottom, which creates a new material. We're then going to click on the texture portion and select the video that we had just made. Just drop down this arrow here so that we can change our frame number. Sometimes when bringing the animation across, it jumps a frame or two. So I believe it's 2 for this particular video. We'll have a look there, but we want to get fairly close. Accuracy is important. Then in the editor tab, we want to make sure that we're animating the preview. So we're going to just create a background and then apply this new texture by dragging it to the background. And so there's our video. This now gives us something to work with. So now we're going to add a model that I downloaded from turbosquid.com. So I have it in a folder here. And I'm going to take the OBJ or object folder, drag it back into Cinema 4D, just using the defaults, and it'll bring across in a new window our car. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this particular part of the object, which is the collider. And now this shows a Lamborghini Aventador. I'm going to select it and copy it. And then go over to our first window and paste it. So this will just click OK or yes on this. This will bring across our model. Now the model itself is in there somewhere. So we're going to give it a, bring it up to the tracking point layer. So first thing we need to do there is create a spline for the vehicle to follow along. So we're going to select a circle spline, and you'll see that it appears top there. And I'm going to drag it down until we get the down arrow over the tracking point. That makes it a child of the tracking point. Then we're going to go to the coordinates and just set everything to 0, because at this point it will then use the tracking points coordinate system. So everything now is 0. Now we're going to use the scale to scale our circle down to about the size that we want the vehicle to follow along. Then we're going to move the circle so that it aligns properly. Now I'm being careful not to change its vertical position because it is on the plane that we want it on. So I'm just using the green and red arrows in this particular case and not changing the altitude. So let's fine tune that a little bit more. Yeah, it looks good. And so you can see as we track forward in the video, the circle maintains its position. Obviously you can see it through the actual arch itself, which is just fine because we're going to bring it back into After Effects and overlay our green screen version. So now what we're going to do is select the Aventador object and then tags at the top menu there, and then animation tags and align to spline. Now we'll take the circle that we created and drag it into the spline path of the Aventador. And you can see now we can see the actual car. So it's obviously way too big, so we're going to scale it down. And let's rotate it so it's facing properly. And as we move through the path, you can see that it is now stuck to the actual spline itself. So I'm now going to click on the tangential checkbox there and make sure that the Z-axis or Z-axis is selected. And as you can see now, as I adjust the position, it moves around, however improperly. So what we need to do is we need to give it a rail. A rail sort of sets up the orientation on a particular axis. So I just took a copy of that first circle, made it slightly smaller, just so that we can see it and to give a little bit of spacing, but it's all on the same plane. So we'll select the Aventador object again, and you can see here we have our rail path. That's where we want to put this circle. So we're just going to actually double click on it. We'll give it a name, rail. And we're going to drag that right down to the rail path now of the Aventador object. And now you can see we've fixed one thing, and it is not flipping on us. So now what we need to do is we're just going to position it there underneath our track point. Doesn't need to be there, but just for organization. So since we're upside down, we need to flip one of our circles by 180 degrees. So we're just going to select one here. And we'll flip that one. That doesn't seem to make the change. So let's try another one here. There we go. That's facing the right direction. And let's make sure that that doesn't flip as well. That looks good. Obviously, our car is way too big for the environment, but we'll resize that later. It just makes it a little bit easier to see when it's that size. So I'm just finding a point in the animation here where it's next to some other vehicle objects. And then I will resize it in relation to those other objects. So as you've got a couple vans there, so I want to make it not too small, not too big. And that seems to be a bit big, but seems all right. So I'll just speed up and make a few slight adjustments here. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to set our keyframes. So we're going to start at position 100. Obviously this will vary from animation to animation, but I want to start right about here. And then I want the vehicle to be ending at in front of the arch itself. So that's bringing it back to position 8%. And so I'm going to set a keyframe there, and that's just by pressing the button to the left, and you can see that it's red, indicating that it's a keyframe. Now we're going to be going through that tree in the foreground, and that will be partially blocked out with the green screening. However, trees are green, so it will have a bit of transparency through it as well. And so I just wanted to set a stop point there, and then now we'll make it loop around completely again. Now I'm going to use the arrow keys below 0 to get into the negative space. The actual scrolling doesn't work there, so we'll have a negative, which means it's going to rotate around again back to that starting position. And we'll set a keyframe there. And that looks good. And I wanted to have one show off point. So this is just sort of to show the vehicle in the arch itself as we pass through. And so it means sort of adjusting the speed of it a little bit. So we'll change its position so that we can see the vehicle through the arch at that point there. And we'll set that as a keyframe. And that all looks pretty good. And so we'll save that, and that will automatically update in our After Effects project. And so we can switch back to After Effects and have a look and see how it appears in there. So we can see our Cinema 4D object here. And I'm just going to change the rendering settings to the draft mode. And we'll just do a quick little scrub through, make sure everything's there. And next thing we need to do is remove that green screen. You can see when we hide this layer, it takes a few moments for it to render here. But when we hide that layer, we can see our car object there. Now, one of the things with bringing the Cinema 4D file across is that it can be fairly slow. So when tracking from one point to the next, you can see it takes a little bit of time to render. Obviously, this depends on the complexity of the Cinema 4D file. One of the things affecting this particular file is the background image that or background video that we applied in Cinema 4D. So we're going to switch back into Cinema 4D and remove that. Now we still keep the material information for it down here, So we can remove the background, and if we need to put it back in, it's fairly easy to do. So we'll save that, Control S, and then back into After Effects. And so you can see it's a little bit quicker with regards to the rendering there. So now what we're going to do is now select our green screen layer and remove the actual green from it. So we'll go to the Effects panel and select Key, and then drag over the Key Light effect. We'll then use our eyedropper tool on the green area, and you can see now the green screen is gone. In addition to that, obviously you can see now the Lamborghini as it moves around the Arc de Triomphe. Now you'll see also, using this technique, it will now hide behind objects and appear in that archway there. So now we'll do a little bit of fine tuning, and we'll be done. So there are some points where you do not want to use the green screen layer over top. And to do that, we will adjust the opacity of the actual green screen layer from 100% to 0. So you'll find that there are some points where you want it to be over top and some points you want it to be underneath, and you just adjust your opacity as needed. So this technique can be used for a variety of different effects. Obviously, we're incorporating it here with some 3D models. However, you can make text fly behind buildings or apply textures to surfaces like road surfaces. And then obviously entering into the 3D world, you can incorporate place markers in 3D. So this green screening technique will also work with other 3D applications. Instead of using a live Cinema 4D file as After Effects allows, you can use the camera data from the export file or JSON file and incorporate it in your 3D program. Unfortunately, there aren't very many importers for this file format or structure. However, we're working on one for Blender, and we'll make that publicly available when it is completed. So when you've finished your project, you want to render out the video. You'll want to go back to the Cineware plugin and select your render mode back to a final mode. So that's what final looks like, and then this is the software version, which is fairly similar. And then there's OpenGL as well. For best results, I prefer the final mode. So anyways, this is what the final video will look like.